So it is now 6:59, almost 7 o'clock, and we'll continue where we left off with this public hearing on the code amendment. And that brings us back to the staff. So a whole bunch of issues raised, but let's see if Mr. Allerton can respond to some or all of the issues that were raised.
Sure. I will attempt to answer the questions. Some of it will just be reiterating what was stated in the presentation. And it'll help to maybe explain a little bit of how this evolved. Again, the zoning ordinance is directed and set up by the comprehensive plan. It's governed by the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan tells the zoning ordinance, what goes in there. So again, once the comprehensive plan, at least the land use section, was amended in 2005, then the zoning ordinance was amended in 2008, working after a 2-year process, working with a committee that was formed of local residences to bring, and a consultant, to bring the zoning ordinance into compliance with the comprehensive plan. This wasn't a document that was created by a planning department. It was a document created by the people, if you will. Folks who were assigned, who had the opportunity to work on this committee. It was a large committee. There are pages and pages and pages of minutes and discussions and hours spent updating the zoning ordinance to bring it into compliance with the comprehensive plan. So it was that committee that determined that these things needed to be regulated and addressed. So there is a right given to the county from the state, even a mandate. If you look at LUPA, Title 67, Chapter 65, if you look there, it tells you that the state basically mandates, says that the counties and cities shall exercise the rights of this title, which is the LUPA, the Land Use Planning Act, which is Title 65. So the counties are mandated to address this. Now, to what extent that those things are addressed is based upon its citizens, and that's the way this was done. This ordinance was created by those citizens and put in place by the citizens and ultimately adopted by the Board of County Commissioners, who have the legal authority to do that. I agree that an RV is a vehicle. We're not talking about an RV being used as a vehicle. We're talking about an RV being used as a permanent residential structure. It meets, if it's to be set up and used as a permanent residential structure, it meets the definition of a structure. It should receive a building location permit currently based on the current ordinance, if it's going to be used as a permanent structure. The ordinance, Title 12 definitions, define a structure as anything assembled having a location on the ground. Now think about that for a second. Yeah, that's a definition of a structure. And so this is a lot wider and a lot bigger than just eliminating number 11. Eliminating number 11 would mean that recreational vehicles would become a permitted use with absolutely no regulation in any way, which is interesting. Some of the comments received verbal were in contradiction to some of the comments received written, because there are those that want to regulate how a property is used because of the impacts. This is actually a lessening of those regulations. It's taking one and going to two. Right now, you can have one. You can only use it 120 days. And this is lessening that to 2. The challenge that we had as we went through this public hearing process, commissioners, is we took the opportunity to pay attention to the comments on Facebook, but we also took the opportunity to respond to the comments that we received by phone, verbal comments. And so that's why the accessory RV parking space became a little bit diluted. When the Planning and Zoning Commission met, the concern was we're talking about a permanent RV parking space, complete with electrical, water, and sewer hookups. We're talking about establishing a permanent residential structure. And so that is why we defined it that way. The request from the individuals who called in was take out the word hookups. We don't want to have hookups. And I get that, but we're talking about a permanent living structure. We're not talking about something that may be moved or may be there for a little while. We're talking about it being attached to the ground. And so that is why, that is how that evolved, that definition evolved to basically stake it out on the ground and tell us where it's going to be. Is that appropriate? That's for the commission to decide. Is that language appropriate? Does it need to be defined more clearly? That's your decision to make. Does number 11 need to be deleted completely? I only hesitate because the ramifications of what that means in the way that I think that is eliminating number 11 is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. Because you would then allow RV placements completely random and unregulated. Not that this isn't a personal thing. I'm trying to protect what the committee and the people put together and trying to widen it to enough to so it addresses the needs of the people. Is it time to relax it completely and allow RVs everywhere? I don't know the answer to that. I know that in meeting with individuals on these sub-area plans, I'm not sure that is. So I think that those committees will have to continue to address what this means in our areas. But relaxing that, deleting number 11 completely, I'm concerned the impacts have not been considered what that means. I don't think it answers the problem. The ordinance still allows one home and one ADU on a property. I don't know that deleting number 11 solves that issue. That is the challenge with ordinances. It's if we change this, what effect does it have here? It takes a lot of time and discussion, and this is why we have public hearings, because it brings up these ideas that need to be vetted more clearly. Yes, it would change. This change would allow temporary uses up to a year. That's correct. A permanent RV space is a location on the ground. That's what we're talking about. I appreciate and am just as concerned about the impacts that these have on property taxes. The intent is never to increase or change those. I don't communicate with the assessor's office in the decisions that we make and look through. The assessor's office makes their decisions does their analysis based on the use of the property. Whether you have a permit from us or not, they're not assessing that. They're assessing the use that's currently going on. If your property is zoned commercial and you're using it residentially, that's their decision to make. They don't make their decisions based on the things that the planning department does. Okay? They don't make their analysis based on that. Okay? So the fact that if you're living in it as a permanent structure, I don't know how they define those things. We're talking about allowing RVs as a permanent residential structure. That is changing its use. Currently, its use is defined by state as a vehicle, right? As an RV, temporary use. We're talking about changing the use of that RV from temporary to a permanent use. So it is a change, and we're requesting the opportunity to review the property for the impacts, as small and as minor as they are. So the ordinance does not require Panhandle Health sign-off in advance of a location permit. It used to 3.5 years ago. It does not any longer. That is why Catherine does such an amazing job trying to educate everybody at every opportunity she can on the urgency and importance of treating sewer properly on your property. If a blown-up septic system on a parcel that can no longer handle a new drain field is a problem. And those are the issues that they deal with, and the county has chosen to allow them to work those issues out and does not participate in them. That was a decision made 3.5 years ago by that board. I think that the comments on housing not being affordable was an appropriate comment. The Planning Commission in their work session talked about that. I think I answered the questions during the public comment on how the ordinance can change and meld through this process. The P&Z Commission can make changes to this. It goes forward. I think that the advertising is adequate. Advertising the summary of the changes to be made. It will continue to be adequate as we move towards the board. Sometime in early 2016, I should remind the Planning Commission that the board adopted an ordinance that requires that during amendments that the commission must make a recommendation. They have 10 days to make a recommendation to the board. The board can accept that recommendation. The request could also be to send it back. My recommendation would be to consider, if you're going to ask for them to send it back, to include a recommendation with that, if you do ask for that. Because they can choose whether or not to accept or deny that request to send it back. So my recommendation would be to consider a recommendation. There is an opportunity, like I said, the commission has 10 days to provide a response to their Board of County Commissioners. I don't think that there are any other questions that do you have any, Jason? Do you have anything that you picked up on?
Well, maybe I think it was brought up something about double governing, the county making laws that for things that already exist. We're talking about turning RVs into permanent living structures. We're not talking about licensing the RV for road use. We're not talking about how the RV is built at the factory. Fundamentally, what we're doing is we're governing density here. This is a density question. And like Milton said, LUPA, Title 67, Chapter 65, the state of Idaho mandates that cities and counties are the planning authority right now. There's no one else in Idaho that governs the density anywhere. Every city, every county in Idaho, whether they choose to do it or not, has the authority and the mandate to either govern density or to explicitly choose not to govern density. And pretty much most counties and cities with any population at all choose to govern it in some way. So I did pick up on that fundamentally what this is it's a density question. I'm not sure I picked up on anything else.
Okay. Any questions, Commissioners?
Yeah, did you pick up anything in the testimony that needs to be clarified?
Yeah, I think the young gentleman left, but clarifying renting 1 verse 2. The way I read it, you wouldn't be able to actually rent out an RV at a vacation home, whether there's 1 or 2 or 20 on your property. Is that correct?
That's correct. For
A vacation.
temporary use, as a vacation rental, less than 30 days.
But to clarify, that is gonna be just the vacation rental. The conditional use permit for an RV park still exists. Vacation rental is a weird thing because the state of Idaho has chosen to regulate vacation rentals in an odd way as a residential use that counties can regulate sort of within certain guidelines set by the state of Idaho. A vacation rental is a special thing because the state of Idaho has said it is its own separate special thing, separate from every other type of land use in the state in a way, really. The conditional use permit to create an RV park still exists. So potentially you could get the conditional use permit, but a conditional use permit is just that, it's conditioned. It would be a public hearing, just like we're having here, for the P&Z, just like you see here. It would be the same kind of scenario that you're seeing. So yes, you can rent out RVs under certain circumstances, under a conditional use. You just can't call it a vacation rental and use that specific title because the state of Idaho has set that aside. It's its own thing and they define what it is for us.
So one thing that maybe wasn't addressed in response, there were a couple of people mentioned about the whether the parking space definition and the use definition was not particularly clear. I know because we had quite a debate work session on those definitions and how to make them clear and meaningful, not just words.
Correct. And so, I'm not sure where you're talking about.
Well,
The RV use is limited to 2 permanent spaces per lot or parcel.
yeah.
And then it indicates that a second one requires a minimum of 1 acre. It appears clear.
Right, okay.
I thought maybe that was referring to 12801.
So
Definition of
again,
space.
the definition of a space, it's, again, we're trying to identify a permanent, something that's permanent, right? So, it's up to the commission if they want to leave that language or change that language to make it, to clarify that.
So it is, it's interesting, if you look at note 11 for the use table, the proposal in blue, and it talks about each lot or parcel is limited to 2 permanent accessory RV parking spaces, not RVs,
Correct. We're talking about parking spaces.
parking spaces.
That's correct. Because again, when this was discussed, the intention was that we would identify a permanent RV parking space complete with electrical, water, and sewer hookups. And so that's what we were indicating was the space would be permanent.
So that, right, that, I think that maybe puts a different inflection on it, because it's the space on the ground
Yep.
that's going to be
That's
dedicated
correct.
to
I see
siting
your
an
point.
RV.
Correct.
It's a permanent space. Now, the use on that space has been expanded to a year under this proposal. And the number of spaces per acre is clarified. So I think maybe that puts it in a different light.
Right, correct. An RV parking space is permanent by definition.
So yeah, the 1 year is still temporary.
Right.
So there is no time, the whole point of the RV parking space is that it's permanent with no time limit. The 1 year time limit is completely separate from the accessory RV parking spaces defined in 12801.
All right. Any other part of the public testimony that needs a response here?
I do remember one witness talking about, or asking the question, how we measure the impact, or how is the impact measured of increased usage, if we're gonna allow double the usage, right? So, I mean, I can guess it's not necessarily a planning department issue, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it is a planning department issue because the things that happen on property do have impacts.
Okay.
And they can impact an aquifer that doesn't only affect themselves, but can affect the whole area.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things to consider. That way, there's other impacts such as impacts on roads. This will increase the traffic on those roads. But as far as a specific study done, there's not been a specific study done to analyze what that potentially means. The difficulty is that not everybody is going to choose this avenue, right? Currently, the census indicates that in Bonner County, 0.4% of the structures are RVs of about 25,000. So perhaps maybe 500 are RVs. So this is a small percentage of the housing population. Nevertheless, in some areas, it's a greater impact than others.
And it was an interesting question because analyzing the impact of any action is always necessary. And that was kind of a blanket statement, but that certainly is stated in that Land Use Planning Act. If you look at that act, there are some 17 components that are to make up a comprehensive plan. Land use kind of being the focal point. But in every one of those, whether it's schools and school facilities, whether it's roads, transportation, whether it's public services, whether it's utilities, anything, the first word under each caption is analyze past, present, and future statistics, data on that subject. So it does require that. Now, state code doesn't say what amounts to an analysis. So it's left to the Planning Commission to figure that out. And it so therefore doesn't say how rigorous it's to be, it just says analyze. But it's specific because I take it the way it says that. It doesn't say give us your opinion. It doesn't say give us your emotion. It says analyze the facts. So that's our job, is to figure out how to analyze the facts. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. What facts are out there? How do you get information? As Bill just said, approximately 0.4% of housing types based on the census are RVs. That's a pretty good estimate. That, as we know, we're up against a census coming up, and that census will give a pretty good idea of what's happening in this county and in this state and in this country. Will it be absolutely accurate? No. No way. It just won't. So it's a pretty good estimate. So we have to deal with that and figure out, okay, what does it mean? And then based on those analyses, we're to make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners for that element of the comprehensive plan. Again, whether it's housing, whether it's economics, whatever it is. So we have to provide an analysis upon which we can draw conclusions and then come up with recommendations in the form of goals and policies and so forth. So that's why we formed these committees. When we approach this subject of housing, essentially, is what we're talking about. You know, we've had various debates and various discussions with these area subcommittees, Priest Lake, West Bonner County, Southwest Bonner County, Sagal, and Selly Samuels. Different discussions in different places. Down in Southwest County, people are recognizing, yeah, we got a lot of people moving up from Kootenai County into Southwest Bonner County because of the various reasons. How do they find housing? What do they do? You want to put an RV on your site so that you can build your house, as one of the gentlemen testified to, fine. Is 120 days going to be long enough to live in that? Or if you're not, you're going to quote in violation of county code. That's what brought this about, is that situation, plus just the general situation of putting these RVs, like was testified, on your site, on your property, for your people to live in. No, we're not talking about renting them out to the guy who comes in from Seattle to drive a truck or something. No, it's for, essentially for family use, even though that's not written in the code. So, that's what got us here. That's why we're doing this. Milton, you
Yeah, I've been, as you were talking, I remembered it. So, in our discussion, we talked about accessory RV. The words parking space have been added.
yes,
They have been added. So, and it was based on, what is it? So, again, that's a decision for the planning commission to include or leave out, is the word parking spaces. Should it be looking at RVs or accessory RV and take out a permanent RV, which may be complete with electrical, water, and sewer? So, make more sense?
okay.
Milton, there was a question in regards to land swaps with state to private with the 5-foot setback.
So that was a great question. I appreciate people that think forward like that. That's what we need, is comments like that. That is excellent. It would be grandfathered, correct?
Milton, I remember when we had our workshop, we were discussing changing the definition of a recreational vehicle. Because currently it's just 320 square feet, and as we were discussing with the new coaches and everything, with the tip ballot slides and everything else, that may be kind of small.
Correct.
Okay. All right, any further clarifications needed from basic comments from the public? Everybody's, undoubtedly there'll be more, so normally what we do with this, at this point, if we've had the response from both the applicant, which is the county staff at this point, and we've asked questions to clarify, we'll close the public testimony portion, and then we'll go into deliberation. In deliberations, if we are, in our discussion, if we come up with something that says, well, what does this mean, or how does it, we could, in just about every case in the past, we have then asked the staff for clarification on that issue only. No further discussion, no edging into anything, but, so that, realize that might come in our deliberation as well. So, with all that said, and the process so far, we're going to close the public testimony portion, and now it goes to deliberation amongst the commission. So, let's hear some thoughts or discussion.
One comment that came up several times was the impact on the water and sewer, and that by changing wording, all of a sudden we're going to have a massive impact on water and sewer. But I have to believe that there are already people who are living in these RVs that are year-round, and it's not going to be a sudden impact and dramatic change just by changing the wording. I believe it's already in place, those impacts.
Okay. That is one of the interesting things relative to the analysis of those impacts. With a large-scale action, I mean, granted, you know, the highest thing, every available lot in the county could now show up with RVs. That'd be the extreme. But it's possible, in a sense. All the planning that I've done in the last 40 years of being around this industry, the typical is that you, as a analysis group, you decide on what is a realistic expectation of this being fulfilled. So somewhere, and then it's up to what it is. Are you talking, are we gonna be able to sell all the nuts and bolts we order, or what is it? And somewhere between 60 and 100% is the chosen factor that's in there to say, okay, we know we're not gonna sell them all, but let's say we're gonna sell 62.5% of them. What is the effect of that? How do we have to do our supply chain, et cetera? So we haven't discussed that as to, based on this, what do we expect? What do we reasonably expect would be the impact of here? And then as Milton alluded to, and I kind of did too, there's likely to be areas in the county that this becomes active in a different measure than other areas. Very likely. You know, we've had this discussion to an extent in the Sully Samuel area, and they don't really see it as a big issue up there as far as this coming into play. So many things in land use are market driven. So many things that it's really hard to say. The market could go like, look what happened in 2007, 8. Nothing. It all went down. And it's slowly coming back. We're still not at the same activity level this year as we were in, what, 2004 or 5?
Yeah, 2005.
Yeah, so we're still not, how many of you were living here then and saw all of the development, which is the biggest reason why the comp plan was looked at in 2005, because things appeared to be losing control. And then in 2008, the zoning code attending to the comprehensive plan to bring some measure of control and, as a lot of people put it, sanity to the land development practices in the county. So that's where that came from. So that group there that were involved, that was their main theme. And now we're here. The other interesting thing, that state code that says you must have a comprehensive plan in your city or county says, oh, by the way, periodically review it to see if it's still valid. Well, that's what happened then. That's why we're doing this now. Or this, the comp plan amendments and this kind of code changes are to keep up with the perceived pressures on whatever. You know, the question was asked about where did this come from? Where did the, why is it necessary to change even what's there, the 120 days? Because people were calling the county and saying, I want to occupy my RV to build my house more than 120 days. Am I going to get a fine or whatever? Or neighbors were calling, those people have been living there for 3 years, go after them, you know, that kind of stuff. So you get both ends of the spectrum. Anyway, not sure where I went with that, but.
Another thing, when we were going over this and talking about it, when the lady was talking about affordable housing, we touched upon the fact that sometimes you have a parent that you would like to have close, and it's fitting to put them into a facility, but you could have them on your property in an ADU unit. Same way if you had someone that needed some extra help, you could be available, they could be on your property. It's trying to alleviate and actually allow more of that to happen. So that's another way that we look at making this more user-friendly and loosening some of those regulations so that you can do that with a loved one or someone needing some assistance. It gave the people maybe a choice.
So, Mr. Chair, I would recommend that the commission look at this wording and see if it's adequate, if there's anything that needs to be changed.
Yeah, so that's,
Yeah, I guess, as far as the wording go, you know, looking at the density and dimensional standards, you know, it says dwellings not to exceed a total of 3 dwelling units. If you can have a house, an ADU, and 2 RVs, that's 4.
That's
So
correct.
we would be contradicting other code that's already in place.
So that's a good question. You wouldn't, because we're defining something different. That's talking about single-family dwellings, 3 full-size homes.
Well, what's the difference between a dwelling and a structure? Didn't you use the definition
I
of
did.
dwelling?
I did.
So I'm confused now.
So a dwelling is a single-family home, okay? An ADU is limited to 900 square feet.
So that's not a dwelling.
It's a dwelling, but it's an ADU, it's accessory dwelling.
Accessory.
So it's limited to 900 square feet. And then the RVs would have to meet the definition of the RV.
So it's not a dwelling.
It's a dwelling, it's a different type of dwelling.
It's a dwelling with a
It's-
lowercase d.
I get the comment, but that's what makes these things so challenging. In that first sentence there in blue, the question you should be considering is, do you want to leave in the word parking spaces or leave it as that?
Accessory RV.
Yeah, accessory RV or RV parking spaces.
I wonder about that time limit thing too. We had one witness, I remember talking about, what's the difference between 120 days and then, all right, you're staying out a year, where you're still gonna have some of the same problems of enforcement. I think that was a good point, right? So what are we using to determine our length of time, and what do we really intend to do about it if it goes beyond that?
That is why the original proposal was, we were talking about an RV with hookups would be a permanent RV.
Right.
That's why the language was put in that way in the first place. So it didn't have to do with time, it had to do with how it was attached to the property. That's what makes it a permanent dwelling unit, is the fact that it's attached to the property.
Okay, so, looking at this language, each, and this is note 11, each water parcel is limited to 2 permanent accessory RV and/or parking spaces. And then the standards apply, 496 apply. Why was it necessary to throw in temporary, meaning less than a year, and use of an RD does not apply?
One of the phone calls we received, it felt it was important to define temporary.
Well,
I mean, see how it got diluted by adding the word parking space.
yeah. Right.
I mean, if we don't have some temporary exception, you know, you now need a building location permit Memorial Day weekend.
Yep.
Right.
So temporary is very difficult to enforce, but it seems more difficult to get rid of it.
I just don't know that it didn't confuse things by putting it in the same paragraph. Note. So that'd be one thing to consider if it just said, note 11, which is recreational vehicles, the use table showing permitted in all these zones except industrial. And to say that, just outright, 2 are permitted as accessory RVs or RV parking spaces. And the standards apply. Temporary could be
Moved down to
would be like
496.
either a note 12 or a 11A and 11B. Or put in the definition section. It would make more sense, I think, to put it into the definition of accessory RV or RV parking space, because it says permanent, and it says almost to reiterate the note. then make
Okay.
some statement about the temporary, which does not apply to temporary, meaning less than 1 year or interim use.
So like the change you made up on the screen there?
But did you solve your enforcement issue? I didn't hear it being resolved in that statement.
It still doesn't.
It still doesn't resolve the enforcement issue.
No,
Nothing to information.
no, it's one of those
120
things
days,
that's,
1 year, 2 years, 5 years.
doesn't lend itself.
Right.
And I just wanted to maybe just a little clarification if I can. Temporaries are, if we adopt this, temporaries are not going to be regulated at all.
That's correct.
And no matter how many there are, number-wise, they're not going to be regulated.
Oh, so you could have
You can have, you know, they're
20.
Right,
Yeah.
but-
Memorial Day
It's just
weekend.
the executive.
So,
It's less than a year.
so remembering back, that's where the space came from, because here's a pad, a recognized spot where an RV can sit for an extended period of time. My neighbor pulls his RV into his lower field periodically and has friends come and stay in it. And then at the end of their stay, he hooks it up to the truck, takes it to the dump station, cleans it out, brings it back. That's the use of a less than permanent or a temporary or a sporadic, or what the word was, intermittent use. You know, same as you do, take your RV up into the national forest and park it somewhere for a weekend and go hunting or whatever, bring it back at the end. There's no hookup. That's where the hookup came from. That's where the less than permanency came from. That's how it got built into this, as I recall.
So the question is, do you delete the meaning less than a year? And temporary
Just-
becomes the opposite of permanent?
Yeah, that seems to be at this point a logical movement. Okay.
And then who's determining permanent versus temporary at that point? We're back to the enforcement.
So again, permanent would have to be complete with hookups. If it was to be permanent, then that would also trigger a location permit.
It may or may not happen.
So that language can be changed. That's why you're here, is to, do we accept this language or not?
Okay.
maybe.
So we're talking about the definition of permanent versus temporary, and then how is the best way to define that?
You know, and as was also stated, any code goes into effect when a person asks about it. We've had this discussion many times. When a person moves into Bonner County, are they aware that there are various code regulations that they should look into and be aware of, or not? There isn't. As with some of the cities, they post at the city limits zoning code in effect, or something like that.
There are signs.
There are signs, and it says building location permits are required. Okay, so that puts them on notice, so to speak, if they see the sign, that they should be looking into that. Doesn't say where to call, doesn't say how to do it, and as was also stated, we talked about some kind of a heavier preamble on the county's planning site, website, to explain some of this, or at least some handout at the counter or something. But people have to look into it, either coming in to build on a piece of property, or the neighbors who see something going on their neighboring parcel and want to find out what's going on, why is that there, how come they were allowed, or whatever. And that's where a lot of the questions come into the planning department. So, as we've heard over and over again for the last few years, the staff is trying to come up with something that's logical, sensible, sensitive, and to some extent enforceable. And this is one of the tough ones. Somebody doesn't know about it, any of the codes. Well, I didn't get a building location permit. Well, you should have. You didn't, you're not quite in keeping with note 11 of the land use table. Well, I didn't know about it. So I don't know, it's a tough one.
I did notice that I didn't hear anything where anybody was upset about any of the commercial side of the stuff. They thought that was perfectly fine to regulate that one. So in my mind, I'm just thinking that the, like one thing we want to avoid is somebody running a air quote temporary RV park, right? So they've got 25 of them out there. They're doing exactly the same thing as the commercial use table, but they're just going to call it temporary. So somehow we need to make sure.
Well, I believe that's already in code. As soon as you're allowed to go ahead and charge up to one, but as soon as you start charging for
Yeah.
that second one, that triggers the park.
Right.
It's defined as a park.
And that's still a, how do you regulate it, right?
Yeah, always an eggy question.
Which comes back to, if, when it's permanent, it's because it's hooked up, but who knows it's hooked up?
Yep.
The neighbors know it's hooked up, and it's when they call, did we find out it's hooked up?
Yeah. Quite often, that's how
Because there's no enforcement. or-
code violations are found. Somebody brings it up.
Milton, has the staff looked at fees for a building location permit for an RV?
We have, they would definitely be reduced. It would be a reduced set. Again, it would be based on the fact that there would be one inspection, not two. So with this paragraph, do you want, you said and/or parking spaces, what? Or should we?
Okay, yeah.
And or what?
12.801 definitions, accessory parking space, RV parking space, so that's the space. The use, now, okay, let's argue semantics. The use is back to the
That's why I'm
the
saying,
domicile.
that's what I'm saying, yeah.
The use isn't a parking space.
Correct.
To get persnickety about it.
We are.
I only got 2 spaces, but I got 5 RVs.
Yeah. You did it. You're at 366 days. Yeah. Well, it's just for utilities, it was me.
That's right. I almost think we need another workshop for this.
I know, it is.
You know, what I really appreciate is all the public coming out and raising the questions that made us question more. And if it wasn't for the public getting involved, we may not have had some of the same questions.
And I know we've had 2 workshop sessions on this. And I cannot recall how many members of the public we had at those sessions. I just don't.
We had
recall.
some, yes.
It
I
was
know
2
there
in
were
one
some.
session.
Yeah, some certainly not a room full.
Yeah, it's like 8 at another one.
So, yeah, it's always a benefit to having the public, you know, and even if we fill the capacity, 85 people in here, say 80 public sitting here, that's a very small percentage of the 47,000 people who live in Bonner County. But it's still more than 2 or 3 showing up for a workshop. And I think we had a pretty good cross-section here tonight of opinions and feelings. But complex issue, I don't know. I don't know if we can come up with collective thought and good, solid thinking tonight to make a recommendation. Now, let's cover the options for tonight's action. We've got to, that other code section says on a code amendment, we have to make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners within 10 days of the public hearing. I would ask for clarification on that. The public hearing includes the public testimony and the deliberation, not just the public testimony. We closed the public testimony portion, and now the deliberation. Are we, under that other code section, are we bound to give a recommendation to the board in 10 days, or could we schedule another workshop for us, since we closed public testimony, to get into this more? I don't know whether the council wants to answer that, or.
Would you like me to?
Yes, please, so that you can be duly on the record.
You want me to pull it up?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Bill Wilson. I work for the prosecutor's office. I know the statute does say that you have 10 days to give the board a recommendation. It also says that you may request an extension of time from the board. I think this would be an appropriate, perfect opportunity to do that, given the complexity of what you're dealing with.
So
I can't
let's-
speak for the board. I anticipate they would grant that. Yeah, go to the code section there and we'll see. I think it also speaks to the failure to give a recommendation will count as there's a default answer there. But I do anticipate the board approving an extension. I just can't speak for them.
Okay, so looking at the wording there, as it's been pulled up on the screen, when a hearing is required for planning and zoning as described in this section, the commission shall produce written findings and recommendations and transmit them to the Board of County Commissioners within 10 days. This time limit may be extended or modified by written consent of the board. I don't know if that implies that in our recommendation we would request such an extension.
I think the code section envisions, it does envision 10 days from today. It was written in a restrictive manner, given the circumstances at the time. So you are constrained by the code section. I think the safest manner would be give a recommendation the best you can, because I think you lose the right if you don't give one at all, but also ask for an extension of time to address additional issues.
So since the requirement is to produce findings, written findings and recommendations, findings could be based on the public testimony at this hearing conducted on the 21st of November, in addition to the proposal as presented by the planning department. We find that we are requesting additional time in the form of a commission workshop to resolve the issues and come to a whatever word you want to put in there for.
I think that would be fine. In fact, we've never actually invoked this portion of the statute before.
We have.
So we are going into uncharted waters.
Or not, we have done it before.
Have we done it once?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Yeah,
2 years
there was
ago.
one that we had to.
But I do think it was written in a restrictive way. So I do think that at least on the matter that's before you, you should give a recommendation, whatever you choose that to be. But of course, then add in the additional request for time.
So the way that
Do you have any other further questions for me, Chairman?
I don't believe so. Is there anything else for council? Thank you.
All right, I waited
Stay there.
3 hours just to do that.
I
Stay there.
Thanks for sticking with us, Bill.
So does this, within 10 days, does this allow them to continue? If they wanted to continue this hearing to a date and time certain within that 10 days, to complete that recommendation to the board?
My concern there would be notice to the public. I don't know that state statute authorizes that. We say that we need to follow
Okay.
the notice
I
and
get
hearing
it.
procedure in 67, 6509. So I don't know if we'd be able to do that if we just tried to reset a quick hearing. So I don't think that's possible.
So, and I think one thing, this item, it's a hard one too, because at the end of our hearings, we adjourn to a date certain, the next hearing date. This item, well, we're making a recommendation. We've got to make a recommendation. We're not, this item cannot come up within the next 10 days because that next hearing date is more than 10 days out.
Right.
So we make our recommendation, requesting an extension of time to make a formal recommendation on the action to the board. And we could put in there, so this is a question for staff at this point, it appears the next available workshop date would be the 12th or the 19th of December.
Then, yeah, we're pretty booked with 5 on the 5th and the 19th.
Yeah, okay. So it'd be after that. And since it's a workshop, I'm forgetting exactly the notification, public notification process for a workshop.
If we're gonna do a workshop, we just put it on our schedule. and
Yeah, I
do
think
a
that's it.
workshop.
It's not, because we are working under the notice, public notice for this hearing today, and that's, we're just asking for extension of time for deliberation, not for further public notice or public input.
Just deliberation.
Just deliberation. So we put that in our recommendation to the board at this point, based on, again, the facts of listening to the public. We'll determine whether we need to be more specific with that, but that seems to be where we're going.
I think that would be appropriate. I do think though that it does, the statute does require a recommendation, yea or nay, on the subject matter before you today. It requires that you give a recommendation for the board to approve or deny.
Because this says that the time limit may be extended, that's my concern. They may deny it.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, the concern is that if you don't give a recommendation at all, then the default rule kicks in. And for some reason, like I said, I can't speak for the board. If they chose not to grant the extension, then they'd be stuck with they'd be stuck with the default answer that the code provides. So I know you don't want that to happen. So I would encourage you to do the best with what you have, give the recommendation based on what you have before you, ask for the extension, assuming you'll get it, but planning for the worst if you
I
don't.
understand.
All right, I think
That's the best way you can do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, based on that, if we have to make what do you want to call it, an actual recommend approval or denial of this case, and yet say that based on public testimony, we recommend more consideration on our part, then that appears to be a recommendation for denial.
Seems like to me.
With the caveat and the reason why. And again, you make a recommendation, you've got to back it up with facts, you've got to back with the reason why. So that's where that section of code says, with findings, written findings and recommendations, and transmit them to the Board of County Commissioners. Okay, so we'd say that, to some extent with some wording, and caveat it with, we feel that this could be resolved, taking public testimony into account. We would like to be given the opportunity and an extended time frame to, in our own workshop, to consider this further. But
Could they overrule it?
they could overrule that. It says may. If they overrule it, they hold their own hearing. I guess, I'm not.
You're going right back.
Yeah, I think they hold their own hearing, which I believe that was the other change in that code, that when a recommendation comes to them, they hold their own de novo hearing, period. It's not just to consider the planning commission's recommendation, they hold their own de novo hearing. Now, I don't know if that was across the board on all cases, or that just dealt with code. Well, the only deal was zone changes and comprehensive plan amendments from us, and subdivisions. Because the other thing just crossed my mind, we make our recommendation, it has a caveat. The case is closed, unless they say, no, okay, go back and hold your workshop and then make a formal, a complete recommendation. Otherwise, so I don't know how, they've got to grant us the permission to bring it up again at a workshop, otherwise we can't.
And another hearing, you'd have to have another hearing and make another recommendation.
Well, that's
And
true,
make a-
they would have, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's the complexity in that, it isn't,
Yeah.
unless they could somehow not consider our recommendation, void it or something, or take it as a caveat, you go back and tell us whether or not you really mean denial, and if you recommend otherwise, we'll consider it at a de novo hearing. I don't know, we're getting pretty complex, but Billy, maybe.
Always remember, what you give is just a recommendation, so even if you recommend denial.
That's true.
They could still choose to take up the matter, amend the code as they see fit. They could add the changes that that you considered.
Yeah,
and
which is-
more comfortable tackling, in one.
Which
one
I
bite.
believe is why they, a few years back, said that they will hold a de novo hearing on
Right.
anything coming from our body.
Right.
It's a
So
recommendation
they don't have,
from us.
this is an advisory
That's
committee,
right.
and the final say is with
Rests
the
with
Board of
the-
County
because
Commissioners.
it
Although they
results
give you
in-
guys great deference,
That's a good
ultimately it's their
question.
decision.
I do have one question. We both can probably answer this. If we recommend denial on this, and it goes to county commissioners, then do they have to hold another hearing on it?
Yes.
Okay, if we recommend approval, they have, and then they can go ahead and finesse this how they wish, do they have to hold another hearing?
The board typically holds a hearing no matter what.
Okay.
I do recall going back, I don't have the statute on the tip of my tongue. I do know that there is some language in the statute saying if there is if the board takes no action, then there is a presumptive something, and I just don't have that on the tip of my tongue. But in practice, the board will always take the matter up, whether or not you guys approve or deny, and then they will make their decision.
They have to hold a hearing anyway because this is resulting in an ordinance to amend the comp plan and an ordinance to amend the.
67, 6509 Act requires the governing board to
Right.
take that up. So thank you for the correction. There will be a hearing on
There will be a hearing on
Yes,
this.
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
And a
sir.
thought. So, that is a hot microphone. Consider this. Split up the ordinance. Ask them, make a recommendation on the private use and make a recommendation on the commercial use. If you're satisfied with the commercial use changes, make a recommendation to move it forward. Ask them to send back the recommendations for the residential use. You can cite things such as the RV use versus RV space is unclear and needs to be researched further. The temporary versus permanent needs to be more clearly defined. You can include some of the comments that have been made here tonight in those findings and ask the board to send the residential use portion of this ordinance back.
I think that's excellent.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. So here we are. We are deliberating.
Now that just got more complex, if you just break it up.
Well, in a fashion, I think, as was mentioned during the director's response to the public, it didn't appear that anyone had any substantial comments on the RV parks or campgrounds. And there was nothing that came into the record, and so if we took that aside and said, let's not boat anchor that with the problems in the lot use, let's make the recommendation either way, whichever what you all decide on that one, and then, in other words, kind of bifurcate what was brought to us as a single action, single file.
So for clarification, would that require then two motions then?
Yes.
Or do you put it all into one, lump it into one motion?
I defer to the attorney.
I think one motion's fine.
One
You
motion,
could
all right.
move to recommend approval on the portion that you see fit, and recommend denial on the part that you don't. It's all one recommendation, I guess, in that sense, but.
That would probably be in keeping, otherwise we might run afoul of two recommendations with one file.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't wanna let form override substance either. I mean, one motion, the board will understand, and I think that the message will be conveyed.
Okay,
So if you just call out the sections,
Right.
like CRC 12333, and just
Yeah.
walk through those, and then go on to each one.
okay, now that we got all the bugs worked out.
And I'd like to bring up again the yard and spacing, the 5-foot setbacks from Forest Service and state ground, Milton.
I will make a personal comment.
Will you just take that off?
Well, if you want to make a motion to take that off in your recommendation. for approval.
I just imagine somebody shooting a turkey 5 feet from somebody's RV that's up against Forest Service land.
Tent.
Or tents. Just, I don't know.
That's occupied space, it doesn't count, it's different.
I make a motion on 12-497, section B-A, to remove a 5-foot setback from Forest Service or state property lines as permitted.
Well, right now.
So keeping 25 feet.
25 feet, RV park 25 feet from the property line, it seems reasonable.
I would also like to bring up a point that if we're going to go forward with the commercial, then what are we doing with the definition? Because I'm hearing that we're holding up the definition, yet the definition ties into both residential and commercial. So now you have a conflict, because it does state the parking, RV parking space, which is part of the definition.
It's not.
Yeah, you can still handle those definitions separately.
Because we have RV parking space under the density.
It's not.
You know, there's-
We define an RV park as any premise designed for the rental of 2 or more RV parking stalls or spaces.
And there's many other performance requirements, site plan, definition, description, showing where the sites are, what they are.
Correct.
So there's quite a bit of specificity that comes with the rest of the RV park.
I do agree with that. I just have a problem for the fact that we're talking about RV space and then we're going back and redefining our RV space.
So actually, I'm not sure that's a problem because 12801 defines accessory RV parking space, but all the commercial stuff says RV space, doesn't use the word accessory. So it seems like we have a
I
different.
yield that, thank you.
Yeah, I think that clarifies it. So, also, comment about
Sure,
the
you do have a
motion
motion
made that's on the floor. I'm not sure if it's proper to make a motion like that.
Oh, you have to do it on, during
Make
the
it,
motion.
yeah,
Oh.
if you want to make the motion for the action, make that as a change in the recommended language, because you're saying what's shown in red under 12-496 for recommending approval, except for, yeah, your motion would change that part of others.
Yeah, amended.
Or, yeah, well,
So you say as amended,
as amended,
and then you say,
and then clarify the amendment.
Would now also be the time to go ahead and up the square footage minimum for the definition of recreational vehicle?
Whatever you see necessary.
What,
Well, that would be part of the workshop.
Yeah. Oh, right, that would be, because we're not.
I guess that would still apply to the RV parks and
Yeah.
campground.
so that's what we're talking about, space, not side yard. Right.
Yeah, it's not on the table already. It's just in. So that would be another reason for findings, for justification to bring it back. Interesting.
Yeah, right.
Is someone ready to see how we're gonna use for this motion?
I will scroll you through it if you want to call out the headlines. The code sections 12.332 residential use table, number 11, 12.801 definitions, 12.496 recreational vehicles. And those would be recommended for denial or request to, denial and request to return.
Sorry, would you repeat that?
Sure.
Just didn't know you were talking to me.
I wasn't until I just looked at you and said, Bill should confirm this. So just stating those code numbers and then recommending denial and request for return.
Sure, so segregating the ones on which they agree and those which they deny and ask for additional time.
Yes.
And using the rationale for that as the written, let's say,
The findings
Findings.
as discussed, or?
citing, either outright citing some of the public comments that we heard tonight, or less than that, just saying, due to public comments heard orally at the hearing, concerns about, we could just list them generally, concerns about this, and this, we said, didn't write it down. So,
Kind of ready to start making a motion?
okay,
I'll stab at it.
take a stand.
All right, this is Commissioner Kempton. I move to recommend approval of this file, AM0007-19, to the Board of County Commissioners, amending the sections of Title 12 Bonner County Revised Code. With this amendment in 12-497, Section B, and Section A, striking the sentence, a 5-foot setback from Forest Service or state property lines is permitted. Based upon the evidence submitted up to the time.
You have them backwards.
Yeah.
496 is recreational vehicles, 497 is RV parks and campgrounds.
So she said 497.
Yeah, I want 497. Thank you for that. Yeah. Based upon the evidence submitted up to the time the staff report was prepared and testimony received at this hearing, this action does not result in taking private property. And at this, as part of this motion, a request to, what's the terminology for that? To what?
Revisit.
Request to receive from back from the BOCC.
The word in the code was extend, time extension
Okay.
for a decision on,
Got it.
then you'd have to cite this.
And as part of this motion, requesting an extension from the Board of County Commissioners to revisit the residential use table 12-332.
Number 11.
That's
Number 11.
Footnote 11. To change, do I need to give all kinds of? Can you make it bigger?
Well,
Oh, just the whole, read the whole.
Just 12.801 definitions, A, accessory RV parking space.
Oh, so just this whole thing,
Just-
okay,
Just
sorry.
say,
what's
just say
covered in-
Extending that, or requesting that extension to revisit 12-332 residential use table, note 11, 12.801 definitions of accessory RV parking space, and 12.496 recreational vehicles. Is that better?
now, and I think
One other thing.
comment,
You didn't address 12.333, the commercial use table.
that's parks and campgrounds.
Well, he made a
Oh,
motion to
okay,
approve
right,
the
right.
entire thing
Yeah,
and
that was-
accepted out those three.
Yeah,
So do you understand that? The motion was to approve the entire thing, accepting those three sections.
did specifically mention
Oh, and the change.
12.497.
Yeah, making that
I
amendment.
will highlight that.
So, in that motion, because I believe in reading it, we talked about staff, or as presented or amended.
Yeah, I said as amended, well,
I think we just need to put in something, due to public testimony at the hearing, issues raised by the public that we need more time to consider.
okay. As part of the motion, requesting this extension for the purpose of revisiting wording based on testimony received at this meeting and feedback from public.
So that's the reason why we're requesting the extension recommended.
To a public workshop.
Well,
We'll just revisit the whole thing.
Just to
what you
revisit,
said.
Just to revisit, okay.
You're fine.
Procedure takes over from there. There we go. Okay, now, it's my job to reiterate the motion. Okay, we have a motion on the floor to recommend approval of revisions to code section 12496. Nope, sorry, no. Strike that. Revisions to recommend approval to the Board of County Commissioners of code section 12-497 RV parks and campgrounds with the modification of, under that.
Sure. So the motion was to approve the entire file with the exception. My
of-
point in that is that you're skipping 12-333.
Right, right.
And you're leaving that out.
Okay, so the motion is to accept or to recommend approval to the Board of County Commissioners of the code change to Title 12 as recommended. Boy.
Which is file AM,
Of the, yeah, do the numbers.
which is file AM.
AM 0007-19.
It would take more time.
With the, how do we call it, exception of section 12-497.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
497.
B,
A, to remove that
5-foot setback.
5-foot setback. Also with the, how to just state, it's not a recommendation for denial, but it's with the time extension to consider public testimony as received at this hearing today towards amendment of sections 12-332, residential use table, sub 11, and definitions 12-801A, accessory RV park, and
Space.
RV parking space, and the change to 12-496 recreational vehicles.
You did it. Can we clap now?
Do we, that you can clap. Okay, any further discussion on that motion? Yikes. I hope there is, but I hope there isn't.
Mr. Glassman will second it.
Oh, we had, that's right, we needed a second. Yes, sorry. We have a second by Commissioner Glassman. Now, any further discussion on the motion?
I think we're doing the right thing.
All right, there's one good comment. Any more? And I hope that procedurally we knocked the ball out of the park. So, I think we did. Okay, so therefore, hearing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Hearing no no's and all ayes, the motion passes. So we will make said recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. So, public, thank you again for being here and participating. I'm glad you all stuck it out to the end, that's great. Watch the paper. What'll happen next is the board has to then advertise their hearing for a date certain in the paper, and they do it pretty quick. So watch the paper over the next week, 2 weeks, I think week probably, or something, they will, because this will be presented to them.
Yes, in a public hearing, just like this.
Yeah. So, you know, they set their agenda every week. So watch the paper for their hearing. They're taking up of this issue. And it's a public meeting as well. Essentially, like I said earlier, their job now is to consider this and shape an ordinance around it that would amend the county code per their findings. So that's their job. That's why they has to, we make a recommendation to them. There's other things that planning and zoning, our decision is final, appeal to them, but not a recommendation to them. This is one where it has to go to them. Yes, ma'am, question?
During this pending state, is code enforcement going to be enforcing any of the regulations for residential?
The ordinances are in place, there's always a possibility that enforcement
Yeah.
occurs.
Code is there, so, you know, one thing, and planning department has told us, and the enforcement folks have told us, they don't go out looking. They don't have the resources
Really?
to cover the whole county, you know, every day. Something
We're
comes
talking
in,
about specific.
something comes into the staff that says, would you look into this? Phone call, somebody drops in, whatever, then there is an obligation to investigate.
I'd like to bring aware to the committee
So
that
we're,
the Bonner
yeah,
We're
County,
out of order.
Yeah, we're not,
well, they are looking.
well,
they are
fine.
fishing.
That's not germane to the argument tonight, the issue
Okay,
tonight.
I
So,
understand. Thank
we're
you.
still in public session. If we're done with that, we made our recommendation. So, I say we're done with that issue, we're beyond that. And do we have anything else on the agenda?
You do have an executive session.
All right, so we have an executive session that we need to go into relative to our subcommittee. So once again, thank you all for